The golden sun wrapped us with its warmth. The sun was a warm, heavy blanket. It covered everything on my island. Hibiscus bloomed in deep reds. Hibiscus bloomed in bright pinks. Their colour was so loud, almost like a shout. The sea whispered secrets to the shore over and over again. This was my kingdom. I didn't need a map to know its borders. It started at the mango tree in our yard. It ended where the fishing boats disappeared over the horizon. Every grain of sand, every curling wave, felt like they belonged to me, a world painted in the brightest colours imaginable. The air itself hummed with magic and possibility. My grandmother was the queen of this kingdom. Her throne was a rickety wooden chair on the veranda. From there, she surveyed her domain. Her hands were never still, shelling peas, weaving palm fronds, stirring a pot that smelled of thyme and cloves. She would tell me stories. Kings and queens in faraway lands. Lands that sounded cold and grey, covered in mist. Castles with tall, pointy towers. Towers that pierced the clouds. It all sounded so different from our world of endless blue skies. Vibrant green hills. Her voice would get low and serious. She talked about a queen across the ocean. A queen with a heavy crown and a serious face. A palace made of gold and stone. Guards in tall, fuzzy hats who never smiled. My grandmother's stories made this other world feel real. As real as the feel of the sun on my skin. As real as the taste of sweet mango juice dripping down my chin. I would sit at her feet, a small girl with wide eyes, trying to picture it all. Grand halls, sparkling jewels. I believed every word. And somehow, my little island, my little kingdom of sun and sea, was a tiny, forgotten corner of her vast empire. A small jewel she probably didn't even know she owned. This was my first truth. The fairy tales came in books. Books with glossy pages, beautiful pictures. The paper felt different. It felt important. Princesses, long flowing hair, gowns that shimmered like the sea. Princes, handsome and brave, white horses. They fought dragons. They broke evil spells. These weren't just stories to me. They were instructions. A guide on how the world was supposed to work. I would wrap a bedsheet around my shoulders. That was my royal cape. I would find the shiniest leaves and weave them into my hair. That was my tiara. I would walk through the yard with a serious, regal expression. I was a princess in exile, waiting for my prince to arrive. My cousins would laugh, but I knew. I knew that royalty wasn't just about blood. It was about belief. It was about how you carried yourself. I practiced my royal wave. A slow, gentle turn of the wrist, just like the pictures in the books. School was where the fairy tale was made official. It was no longer just my grandmother's stories or the glossy pages of a book. It was now part of my education. At the front of every classroom, high up on the wall, she was there. A framed portrait of the Queen. She looked down on us all day, every day. Her presence was a silent lesson. It taught us about hierarchy, about who was important. Our teachers spoke of her with a special kind of reverence. They would point to her portrait when they taught us history. We would sing songs about Britain. Songs like God Save the Queen and Rule, Britannia. Our small voices would fill the classroom, pledging allegiance to a monarch and a country most of us had only ever seen in pictures. The line between the fairy tale queen of my storybooks and the real-life head of the Commonwealth blurred until it disappeared completely. They were one and the same. The radio was another portal to that other world. In the evenings, my grandfather would tune it carefully. He was looking for the BBC World Service. The signal would fade in and out, but when it came through clearly, the whole house would fall silent. They spoke of politics in Westminster. They spoke of weather in London. And most importantly, they spoke of the royal family. The radio painted a picture in our minds, filling in the gaps left by storybooks and the single classroom portrait. It gave the fairy tale a soundtrack. Then there were the relatives who came to visit. They were our direct link, our ambassadors from the world of the Queen. They brought suitcases filled with strange and wonderful things. And most importantly, they brought stories. We would pore over these images for hours. We studied the clothes. We studied the jewels. We studied the stiff smiles. Christmas Day had a special ritual. In the middle of the afternoon, a hush would fall over the house. It was time for the Queen's Christmas message. It felt as if she was speaking directly to our family, in our living room, wishing us a Merry Christmas. The broadcast humanized the Queen. It also elevated her. The fantasy had been renewed for another year. My first trip to England was a pilgrimage. I was a teenager, and the journey felt momentous, like a character in a story finally reaching the enchanted kingdom. Climbing high above my island, watching it shrink into a tiny green speck in the vast blue ocean, felt like leaving the real world behind. As the plane began its descent, I pressed my face against the small window. I was searching for the magic, but all I could see was a sprawling blanket of grey and brown. The air that hit me when the automatic doors slid open wasn't crisp and magical. It was damp and chilly. It was a shock to my system. The first sign that the reality of this place might not match the warmth of the dream. We took a train from the airport into the city. The journey, however, took us through a different London. Graffiti-covered walls, grim-looking apartment blocks, industrial estates shrouded in mist. The faces on the platforms were not smiling. Tired faces, stressed faces, commuters rushing, no eye contact. We visited the famous landmarks, Buckingham Palace, the Tower of London, Trafalgar Square. Yet islands of fantasy in a sea of gritty reality. It didn't feel like the centre of a living monarchy. It felt like a museum. The grey wasn't just sky and buildings. I felt it in the atmosphere. The pace was frantic, not the polite, ordered society from the BBC. I saw poverty that I hadn't expected. In the stories, England was a land of wealth and opportunity. But here, on the streets of London, I saw people sleeping in doorways. I also noticed who was doing certain jobs. Driving buses, cleaning offices, working in hospitals. They were people who looked like me, who sounded like my relatives. They were the engine of the city, keeping it running. But they were largely invisible in the official story of Britain. This realization was unsettling. It complicated my understanding of my own identity. It seemed there were different kinds of family members. There were the ones who lived in palaces, and there were the ones who cleaned them. I started to wonder where we fit in. My relatives and their friends told different stories than the ones I had grown up with. Their stories were not about grand palaces or sparkling crowns. They were about the cold, the rain, and the struggle. They spoke of arriving in England in the 1960s, the Windrush generation, full of hope and loyalty to the Queen. They had been invited to come and rebuild the mother country after the war. But the welcome they received was not what they had been promised. They spoke of the signs in windows. No blacks, no dogs, no Irish. The Queen, she is a good woman, my great-aunt would say. It's not her, it's the government, the people. It was as if they needed to keep the fairy tale monarch alive in their minds. The glamour and the pageantry I had adored were the beautiful wrapping on a very complicated and often painful package of colonial history. The immigrant's tale was the hidden chapter of the fairy tale. The story of what happened after you arrived in the enchanted kingdom and found you weren't welcome. Back on my island, the fairy tale had always been simple. A handsome prince meets a beautiful, shy girl. They have a grand wedding. They live happily ever after. But then, the whispers started. The glossy magazines, once a source of pure fantasy, began to tell a different kind of story. The whispers grew into a roar that could not be ignored. The stories were messy and human. They were stories of infidelity, of unhappiness, of a deep and bitter conflict. This was not the stuff of fairy tales. This was a profound shock to the system. The fairy tale wasn't just cracking, it was shattering. If this perfect couple wasn't real, what else was a lie? It was an earthquake that shook the very foundations of the monarchical fantasy. The Princess of Wales, Diana, did not just disappear in disgrace. Instead, she became more powerful. She started to speak for herself. We gathered around our television sets, just as we had for her wedding, but this time the mood was completely different. It was the moment a fairy tale character ripped up the script and told her own truth. She spoke of her loneliness. She talked about her struggles with mental health, with the pressures of her role. She spoke of a marriage that had been a bit crowded. By speaking her pain, she broke every rule. She transformed from a distant, beautiful icon into a vulnerable, relatable human being. This act of rebellion resonated deeply, especially with women. She became the people's princess not because she was royal, but because she seemed to be fighting against the very institution that had created her. Her pain made the cracks in the crown visible to everyone. In the middle of all this personal drama, a very real physical disaster struck. Windsor Castle caught fire. The 900-year-old castle was burning. The fire felt like a metaphor. The House of Windsor literally on fire. The question arose, who would pay for the repairs? The public outcry was immediate. People began to ask, why should ordinary taxpayers pay? The Queen herself acknowledged the crisis. She described 1992 as her annus horribilis, her horrible year. It was a startlingly frank admission from a monarch famous for stoicism. Her speech confirmed the problems weren't just gossip, they were real. The fairy tale kingdom was in turmoil, and the Queen knew it. The annus horribilis shattered it for good. The story became far more complicated and far less magical. This growing awareness created a war inside my own head, an identity conflict that pulled me in two different directions. One part of me was still that little girl. This part of me felt a deep, ingrained loyalty. But another part of me was waking up. This part of me felt a rising anger. It made conversations with my family difficult. My grandmother's simple reverence would clash with my growing political consciousness. To attack the Queen felt like attacking my grandmother's own beliefs. In my Caribbean community, I saw this same conflict playing out on a larger scale. We are a community trying to reconcile the crown with the cane fields, the fairy tale with our history. So, is the monarchy just a fairy tale? It is a story that goes around in circles, a carousel of weddings, babies, scandals, funerals. Each turn of the wheel pulls us back in. We watch the new generation, the handsome princes, beautiful new princesses, and for a moment, we want to believe again. The institution is masterful at reinventing itself. We see the real-life scenarios playing out, the family feuds, the departures, the accusations. We see the institution struggling to contain the narrative. Yet, the show goes on. Will the fairy tale ever manifest as a true, benevolent, and just institution? Or is the gap between the story and the reality impossible to close? Perhaps the magic only works from a distance. I am still the girl from the island looking out at the horizon. The question is whether we will continue to watch it from the shore, forever captivated by its distant glamour, or if we will finally turn away and begin to tell our own stories, build our own kingdoms, and find our own magic, right here, under our own sun. We may have to wait and see. Or perhaps the waiting is over, and it is time to wake up.